Good evening and welcome at the end of this momentous day when each one of us has had the chance to say what kind of country we want to live in. At 10 o'clock the polling stations close after weeks, months, years of argument, and we'll have the answer to the question that's haunted British politics for so long. Do we want to be in or out of the EU?
Here are the key highlights that I've picked from 8 hours of BBC coverage of the EU referendum count that started shortly after 10 p.m. as YouGov's poll effectively gave the referendum to remain on 52% against leave on 48%, which even prompted Nigel Farage to effectively concede defeat at around 10:15, sending sterling soaring to its highest level against the dollar for 2016 and also triggering a sharp FTSE stock futures rally, which I'll cover in depth in an accompanying video on trading sterling and FTSE during Brexit. Until then, here are the highlights of what happened after the polls closed on Thursday 23rd of June. Key points to note whilst watching are: firstly, YouGov gave the referendum to remain at 52% to 49% for leave. Secondly, sterling and FTSE stock futures soared in anticipation of a Remain win. Thirdly, Nigel Farage early on effectively conceded that Remain had won. And fourthly, that the bookmakers were also heavily discounting a Remain win, where even the likes of Alex Salmon mentioned that Betfair had been giving long odds of 14 to 1 on leave, which is set against my forecast conclusion as of 12th of June that was on the basis of a year-long analysis of more than 120 articles and more than a dozen videos that leave would win the referendum on a forecast 51.3% against 48% for Remain. That resulted in trading and betting strategies going into the polls that I will cover the outcomes of in my next comprehensive video. But for now, watch how things went down during Brexit night, especially for the first 2 hours as a Remain victory was being discounted by all, with the first to react being sterling and FTSE futures at around midnight, and then the bookies a good hour later, and eventually the pollsters and politicians, with the BBC declaring its forecast for a leave win at about 4:40 a.m.
Now, when Big Ben strikes 10 in a general election, of course we release our exit poll to give the first indication of who's won. For the referendum, it's not going to be possible. Exit polls work, if they do, by comparing one election with another and measuring the change. It'd be crazy to compare this European referendum with the one that was held 41 years ago. It wouldn't work. So patience is our watchword tonight as we wait for the first actual declarations to come through. So Big Ben has struck 10 o'clock, and we can now start trying to discover which side thinks has carried the day on the basis of the results that come in. Some of the polling booths, I said they were all closed, are staying open apparently because the weather's been so frightful in parts of Britain today that if you're in the queue to vote, the polling booth stays open until you get the chance to vote. And we do have one bit of news from Gibraltar. Gibraltar is an hour ahead of us, so their polls closed an hour ago. At their last general election, they had 71% turnout. This time, 84% turnout, so a big turnout in Gibraltar. Enthusiasm for the vote. And it's one of the things we'll be looking for is how big the turnout is, because the bigger the turnout, well, you'll tell us, Laura, the bigger the turnout what?
Well,
So the thing that everybody's been asking me, and I expect the same with you, Jeremy, is when do we first get an inkling? What's the first result to watch for? What can it tell us? Because people are so keen to see the way the wind is blowing. But Jeremy, what is going to be the moment, and how are we going to be able to tell what's happening?
Well, join me here in Downing Street. We thought we should look at the door of number 10 for a moment, because it was the man behind that door who took the gamble on calling this referendum. And David, yes, the sequence tonight is very important. So Blue for leave, yellow for remain. We're going to build the votes up down Downing Street as they come in. And let's just have a look at what we expect by way of timing. So if you peer down to the end of Downing Street, you can see the first votes appearing. Now, of course, none have been counted yet. We're just putting them on the street in 50-50 to show you, by way of example, what we're expecting. By midnight, we think Newcastle will be in first, ahead of Sunderland, probably voting to stay. That's by midnight. Now, after that, by 1 o'clock in the morning, we're then expecting rather interesting collection. We're expecting Swindon, which is thought to be voting out if previous polls are anything to go by. Bury is 50-50. We should have that by that time of night. And also, let's just see, we probably will have Orkney as well by 1 o'clock in the morning. Then we move forward, 2 o'clock in the morning. We start to hear from London. We hear from places like Barking. Barking could vote out, but most of London thought to be voting to remain, expected to be voting to remain. Lots of votes in London. Westminster and Ealing by, we think, 2 in the morning. And by 3 o'clock in the morning, then some of the big city results come in. So the big numbers coming from the cities. The city's very powerful in this because every vote is equal everywhere around the country. We hear, for example, by 3, we think, from Glasgow, from Sheffield and from Edinburgh. Now, if it starts to be looking very tight around this time of night, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, that could favour leave because it's thought that the later results will go that way. But let's see. By 4 o'clock in the morning, results are rushing in. We will have a torrent, places like Plymouth and Horsham and Solihull, and the biggest, Birmingham, with 700,000 voters, we think, by 4 o'clock in the morning, thought to be edging towards leave, but really too close to have any idea. We don't really know which way any of these places are going. We're just waiting for the first signs. By 5 in the morning, could it be this close? Liverpool, Manchester coming in, and by 6, if we don't know, we're waiting for Winchester and we're waiting for Leicester. And honestly, it'll be, if it's this tight by 6 o'clock, my goodness, we might just get the result when Waveney comes in last. Will it be that close? We'll be building the votes up, blue for leave, yellow for remain, along Downing Street, through the night, a night of great suspense. We put them 50-50 here, but we don't know what's going to happen, do we? David?
Some people say Sunderland, which is expected to vote out of the EU, that they're not keen to get the vote counted too soon because they actually depend on Nissan and other car companies who are like being inside the EU, but that's just a bit of mischief, really. And of course, they're rivals on the football field. So if Newcastle do win, there'll be loud cheers for Newcastle, and maybe Sunderland won't be too miserable. Now, I'm joined by, if it's a narrow victory for Remain, will there be a price the Prime Minister has to pay in terms of people who, I mean, for instance, the Chancellor of the Exchequer has been particularly insulted, reviled by people on your side for his budget, the punishment budget he was going to have. Do you think a head will roll and it might be his?
Well,
to bring people like you, well, I'm not saying you're going back into government, but to bring the party back together?
I don't make any suggestions on this one. I have been very clear about the Prime Minister. I said that whatever happens, the Prime Minister got a mandate. We want him to continue. Clearly, he has to make decisions about who governs with him and who doesn't. That's his decision, either remain or leave. But my simple point is there were lots of disagreements. I mean, I did fundamentally disagree with the Chancellor's position with regards to the emergency budget. Lots of us did. But, you know, that may well be gone, and that's the end of it, really. So
I think you're going to stick around for a bit, aren't you?
Well, if you'd like me to stick around.
Well, I'd like you to. Well, you're the only person we've got here at the moment, so you better stay.
Compliment. Well, okay. On that very high ticket, I'll stick around.
Stick around. We might have it within the hour. We might have something more substantial to talk about. Thank you very much, Ian Duncan Smith. We're going over to Brussels now to our Europe editor, Katja Adler. Katja, good evening. We know Brussels has been watching this all very, very closely. What's the mood there tonight? Are they all sort of watching the telly and trying to interpret what's happened?
Oh yes, well, of course this was a referendum held in Britain, but whether the UK stays in or leaves the EU, that has huge implications for the rest of Europe. So this is being watched very closely, not just here in Brussels, but in Warsaw, Paris, Berlin, across Europe. And also across Europe today, town halls flew the Union flag in a sign of solidarity. But at the same time, there are plenty of Europeans who looked on at the referendum today in the UK with a big dose of envy. They share a lot of those criticisms of the EU that were highlighted by the Leave campaign. And so their worried leaders have started talking loudly about reform, because our referendum is seen as a warning, even by bigwigs here in Brussels, a warning that the EU in its current form isn't working and needs to change. But the big question then in Europe tonight is, can leaders push for reform in the EU alongside Britain if it votes to remain, or will tomorrow be the start of more awkward, frosty relations if the UK chooses to leave?
I don't want to be a sort of sceptic about this, but hasn't the EU constantly said it's got to work to change, it's got to be more democratic, got to be more open, got to do this, got to do that, and actually very rarely does anything?
Yes, got to be closer to the people. I've been following European politics for a very long time. They've constantly said it and they've never managed it. I think what's different now is, in all the years that I've been watching politics, and I started back in 1996, I have never felt the mood in Europe be more Eurosceptic. Now, if you look across Europe, on the whole, that means they want the EU to change. They're not necessarily calling for it to leave. And their leaders are worried. They're looking over their shoulders at increasingly influential Eurosceptic, more nationalist-minded parties. So they know they need to do something. So there is a push for reform from the countries of Europe, the 27 countries apart from the UK, and they say that whether or not the UK remains in the EU, they will be pushing for change. But we do know Brussels, change can take some time.
Though Emily has with her two people who are already prepared to say something about all this. Emily?
We're going to talk about the markets in a second and their reaction to what they think is happening overnight. But first, we're going to talk to our polling god here, John Curtis. David mentioned there was no exit poll, and you'll explain to us why not. We have had, though, what we might call a last on-the-day poll from YouGov. John, just talk us through.
That's right. There isn't any exit poll. There isn't a poll where people have been asked outside the polling station what they've done. But YouGov have done what they did at the time of the Scottish independence referendum, and indeed also last year's general election, which is to get hold of people whom they've been interviewing during the campaign and ask them, what have you done? And on the basis of that, YouGov are saying that Remain have got 52% of the vote and Leave have got 48% of the vote. So this is the first bit of public intelligence we've got about the outcome of this referendum. I'm sorry about there isn't an exit poll, but as David's already explained, the methodology of that, which of course got it right, and unfortunately YouGov's poll, by the way, didn't get it right last year, the methodology of that relies on us being able to compare the results this time with the results last time, and of course there is no last time, so it's therefore much more difficult to do.
Kamal Ahmed is here, our economics editor, and on the strength partly of this and partly of what they think has been the sentiment of the week, we've seen a very strong pound.
Absolutely. I mean, Emily, if the markets were deciding this referendum, they would have already called it for Remain. The pound is absolutely surging on the markets post 10 p.m, post that poll that put Remain ahead. It's nearly at 150 to the dollar. That's a record high for this year. And actually, the pound has had its strongest week, one of its strongest weeks, for nearly 30 years. So clearly, investors think, from all the evidence they're seeing from the polls, we think that some hedge funds have taken their own private polling and have probably been having a look at that. They certainly think Remain has had a very good day. Now, clearly, they know not a lot more than we know here, but certainly in terms of the data there, and also FTSE 100, the shares on the FTSE 100 have also had a strong day on the market. So certainly the signals are that Remain has won. Now, markets aren't political particularly. They're not saying Remain has won, that's very, very good news. All they mean is that therefore the uncertainty of what Leave could have brought, they believed, won't now happen. And so therefore we can start focusing on the other type of issues, the other problems that Europe has, but one of them won't be that Britain has actually left.
And John, in terms of early indicators, some people are already saying Gibraltar's the new Sunderland. Now, Sunderland won't like that very much, but when you're looking, for example, at that narrow gap from YouGov, 48.52, what does that suggest to you that are the factors that might be at play there?
Gibraltar, to be honest, we expect to vote very strongly for Remain, and indeed the turnout in Gibraltar at 84% is extraordinarily high. But of course, for Gibraltar, the implications of the UK leaving the European Union for its relationship with Spain is obviously pretty fundamental.
Well, as the world waits for the UK's decision, the pound has risen to its highest level this year against the dollar and is on track for one of its strongest weekly performances in 30 years. When the New York Stock Exchange closed a short while ago, the pound was trading at just under $1.49. The FTSE 100 share index also closed up over 1 percentage point today.
We'll come to that later in a second, but first, Tim, have you heard or talked to Nigel Farage this evening? There were reports that he was suggesting a sort of concession to Remain.
I haven't spoken to anyone in UKIP today, but you're right, Nigel Farage does seem to think that the referendum is lost as far as Brexit is concerned. But just to give an indication of the divisions within UKIP at the same time, the Leave EU campaign, which is the sort of more feisty side of the Leave campaign, they've issued a poll which says that Brexit could still win. So UKIP not exactly singing with one voice tonight.
And it's very narrow, this YouGov poll, which, as we know, is not an exit poll. Do you think...
Basildon, it turns out that Nigel Farage has now unconceded, having...
What did I tell you?
You said he'd unconceded.
I said he'll do both.
Nigel Farage has unconceded. You said he'd do both things, and so he has. Clive Murray saying he's unconceded. So, nothing new there.
In general election, do you remember he unresigned?
He unresigned. Yes, he did. Resigned and unresigned. Emily.
David, I'm going to speak to Chris Grayling now, who joins us from Millbank, the leader of the Commons. Chris Grayling, good evening. Thanks for joining us. I wonder what you're hearing about Nigel Farage. Has he conceded defeat? Has he unconceded? Terrible word.
Well, I'm a bit puzzled, frankly. I mean, I think it's much too early to concede or unconcede. At the moment, we haven't seen any results at all. What I'm hearing, clearly, there's been a high turnout around the country, but there's been high turnouts in areas that would be expected to back Leave. We're getting polls suggesting Remain as one, so I genuinely don't know what's happened, and I think we're going to have to wait and see until later in the night before we get a proper picture.
Hello from the southernmost tip of Europe, where the count in Gibraltar has finished. 20,000 passionate Gibraltarians have been exercising their right to vote in this EU referendum, with a massive turnout of 84% here on the Rock of Gibraltar. And early indication is that that result will overwhelmingly be in favour of a Remain vote. I've just been speaking to members of the Stronger In campaign. They're sincerely hoping for about 90% for Remain. The result in Gibraltar is imminent. We expect it to be declared in the next 10 or 15 minutes. The count has finished and the results have been sent to the southwest region for verification.
Well, as the world waits for the UK's decision, the pound has risen to its highest level this year against the dollar and is on track for one of its strongest weekly performances in 30 years. When the New York Stock Exchange closed a short while ago, the pound was trading at just under $1.49. The FTSE 100 share index also closed up over 1 percentage point today.
We have the result from Gibraltar, so let's go to Gibraltar and hear from James Niche.
For the Gibraltar voting area and the referendum held on 23rd June 2016 under the EU Referendum Act 2015, and having been authorised to do so by the regional council itself, I hereby give notice that I have certified the following. The total number of applicants counted was 20,162. The number of votes cast in favour of remaining a member of the European Union was 19,322.
Well, you can barely hear it from Gibraltar, but you can see it on the screen, the result in Gibraltar. Just 823 wanting to leave the EU, 19,322 wanting to remain. I'm not quite sure why we can't hear it clearly, but anyway, that is our first declaration, our first result of the 382 we're going to get by 6 o'clock or so in the morning. So that is the first result. It is absolutely no surprise, because it was well known that Gibraltar was going to go entirely. I don't know who those 823 are or what their motive is. Douglas Carswell, they're probably friends of yours.
Maybe they're from Clacton.
Did you think that Gibraltar should vote? Nigel Farage arriving at the headquarters of the of his part of the Leave campaign, Aaron Banks' headquarters. And Nigel Farage, apparently, he now says that his views about what had happened was based on what he'd heard from his friends in the financial markets. So when he said he thought that by a whisker the Remain campaign had won, that was what it was based on. Nigel Farage, of course, who was the man who actually got the whole referendum thing off the ground with UKIP way back, and has had a campaign. He's been quite cross quite a lot of the time with the Leave campaign for excluding him and refusing to turn up at places, and actually running his own campaign and being criticised rather robustly for some of the things, particularly that famous poster showing refugees from Syria, which Douglas Carwell and others complained about. Apparently he did speak here. I don't know why the pictures are so rough. You'd think it was done on an iPhone, those photographs. Where are the pictures? Let's just hear what he had to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I want to say a massive, massive thanks to every single voter today who had the guts to defy their party political leaders, to defy the establishment, to defy the elites, and to defy the big boys. I can't imagine there's ever been a campaign in which ordinary folk have been subjected to so many threats. I have to say that it's been a long campaign. In my case, 25 years. And whatever happens tonight, whoever wins this battle, one thing I'm completely certain of is we are winning this war. Euroscepticism was considered to be fringy, fruitcakey, to quote the Prime Minister. Pretty odd. And now it looks like tonight, maybe just under half, maybe just over half the country is going to vote for us to leave the European Union. I promise you this, if the result is that we vote to leave, we must make sure the government carries out the will of the people. If the vote is we haven't quite made it, then we've got a lot to look forward to as continued EU members. Tomorrow, Mrs Mogherini, the Foreign Affairs Minister, will launch their big new global initiative, including defence. Next week, talks begin for Turkey to join the European Union, and in July or August we look forward to the third Greek bailout. And what has dominated this campaign has been an issue that Westminster finds very difficult to talk about. An issue for which I have been demonised for much of the last 10 years, but an issue, and I shall never remember going to Bolton and a lady grabbing my hands with tears in her eyes and saying, why doesn't the Prime Minister come and see what he's done to our lives, how he's changed our community, what he's done to the prospects of our kids getting jobs or school places or houses. And that issue, if we do vote to remain, is one that is not going to go away. The Eurosceptic genie is out of the bottle, and it will now not be put back. But perhaps even more remarkably, the biggest change from this referendum is not what's happened in the United Kingdom, it's what's happened across the rest of the European Union. We now see in Denmark, in the Netherlands, and even in Italy, up to and around 50% of those populations want to leave the European Union. I hope and pray that my sense of this tonight is wrong. And my sense of this, and no, I'm not conceding, but my sense of this is that the government's registration scheme, getting 2 million voters on, the 48-hour extension, may be what tips the balance. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm made a fool of, believing that to be the case. But either way, whether I'm right or wrong, if we do stay part of this union, it is doomed, it is finished anyway. If we fail tonight, it will not be us that knocks out the first brick from the wall, but somebody else. We have fought an amazing campaign. Even a year ago, we were told the Remain campaign would be 20, 25, maybe even 30 points behind the establishment position. We're not. We're running them close.
Nigel Farage there, who incidentally said that if it was a 52-48 gap, it would be unfinished business. If the Remain campaign wins 2/3 to 1/3, that would end it. And he said that if Remain wins, he was going to go out and get hammered. So he's obviously not going to be able, he thinks himself, to go out and get hammered tonight because he doesn't think they have one, but we'll wait and see. He also, incidentally, was already calling foul and saying that John Curtis, if it is marginal for Newcastle, And we don't know, of course. It's not good for the Remain camp, that, is it?
Well, it's either not good news for the Remain camp or maybe in Newcastle our modelling has not proven to be quite so good. We'll find out later on which of those two things are true. But the truth is, given the evidence we have before us and given the character of Newcastle, this is the kind of place where we'd expect the Remain side to get around 60% of the vote if the country was dividing 50-50 overall. So if the vote for Remain is well below 60%, well, maybe Newcastle's exceptional. We'll have to wait and see. But that is certainly not a result that, shall we say, is consistent with the expectations that have been generated by a couple of polling exercises that were revealed shortly after 10 o'clock.
So it could be an outsider. You wouldn't take it too seriously.
Oh, look, we shouldn't go too strong on just one result. Remember 12 months ago, Sunderland was quite good for the Labour Party, and we said then, hang on, this is not necessarily the way the whole country is going to go. So equally, I would say to you, we've got to get a number of results in before, and we maybe start to build up a consistent pattern before we can even begin to sensibly speculate what the result's going to be.
Okay.
All we can say at the moment is, well, we've heard the polls, and we may be now hearing Newcastle, and maybe we need to suspend our judgment.
When Nigel Farage said that government had fouled by extending the voting period and 2 million more people had come onto the register, do you support him in that? Do you think it's a rigged election, this, which is what he was in effect saying?
I think it's really important to show respect for democracy. We've just been through a very prolonged debate. Yes,
We've got a Newcastle result, David.
June 2016, under the European Union Referendum Act 2015, and having been authorised to do so by the Regional Counting Officer, I hereby give notice that I have certified the following. The total number of ballot papers counted was 129,072. The total number of votes cast in favour of Remain was 65,404. The total number of votes cast in favour of Leave was 63,598. The total number of ballot papers rejected was as follows. No official mark, 0. Both answers voted for, 20. Writing or mark by which the voter could be identified, 5. Unmarked or void for uncertainty, 44. The total number of ballot papers rejected was 69.
So there is the first result from England and from within Great Britain that we've had, and it shows the Leave campaign just a little bit behind Remain, not nearly as much behind as all the experts had been saying we should expect from Newcastle upon Tyne. 63,598 Leave, 65,404, and that is 49.3% for Leave, 50.7% for Remain, and that could be a very significant result because it's against the predictions that all the experts had made about what Newcastle upon Tyne would do. John, you were talking earlier on about students and people with degrees and all that, and that was why Newcastle was likely to be fairly firmly in the Remain camp, not so?
Well, that certainly seems to be the case. So it may be possible that the experts are going to have egg on their face later on tonight, or it may be that this is a first sign that the Remain side are not necessarily going to do quite as well as those early polls suggested. I'll give you a couple of other things, David, that might give the Remain side reason for some concern. The first is that it looks as though the turnout, which may be across the UK as a whole, is going to be over the 70% mark, may well be lower in Scotland than elsewhere in the UK. There's not been much of a campaign there, partly because virtually all the politicians were in favour. Maybe that will work against the Remain side, given how pro-Remain Scotland is expected to be. The second thing is that we've spotted is that we have quite a lot of places now where they've declared their turn-up, and it looks as though in places where there's a relatively large number of pensioners who we know are more likely to vote for Remain, that these places have seen a markedly higher turnout than in those places where the age profile is predominantly younger. So, you know, these are just straws in the wind, but these are first straws in the wind that, shall we say, if 10 Downing Street was feeling a degree of relief at 10 o'clock this evening when they heard the YouGov poll. Maybe the champagne's gone back in the fridge.
And we should say, of course, that for all that we show Newcastle upon Tyne or Sunderland or wherever, in the end, every single vote counts. And it's that's why Scotland's important, because if Remain people haven't turned out in Scotland, then those votes are lost.
Yes, the pattern of turnout in this referendum is as crucial as the number of votes cast.
We have Orkney. Let's see the Orkney Islands result. Leave 4,193, Remain 7,189, and that's 37% for Leave and 63% for Remain. It was expected to be strong for Remain. Well, it's reasonably strong for Remain. If I may, we've got a result from Sunderland. I'll come back to you in just a second. So let's go straight to Sunderland.
Officer for the Sunderland voting area at the referendum held on the 23rd of June 2016 under the European Union Referendum Act 2015, and having been authorised to do so by the Regional Counting Officer, I hereby give notice that I have certified the following. The total number of ballot papers counted was 134,400. The total number of votes cast in favour of Remain was 51,930. The total number of votes cast in favour of Leave was 82,000. The total number of votes cast in favour of Leave was 82,394. The number of ballot papers rejected was as follows. No official mark, 0. Both answers voted for.
Right, let's just we've now had this second result in. Let's just go to Jeremy Vine and see where, and I'll come back to you, Ruth, in just a second, if I may. But let's just go to Jeremy Vine and see where these two results fit in with the pattern that you fixed there, where they go on your slide rule, as I think of it.
Yeah, well, to say these results are interesting is an understatement. Let's just quickly go through what we know so far. If you look at the map here, we've had results from the very north of the country in Orkney to right at the foot of the map here, Gibraltar, with that very strong Remain result. 90% margin for Remain in Gibraltar. That's what places it right down the end of our index. Now remember, our index was built to show us how Eurosceptical the 382 counting areas were. We've now had those two results from Newcastle and Sunderland. I should say, not glossing over Orkney and Gibraltar, but there are very few voters there. Newcastle and Sunderland came back with an awful lot of votes. Let's try and work out how they fit into our index and what they mean. So we start with Newcastle, and that's a strong Remain. According to our index here, it's one of the 40 most likely to vote for Remain. So you see beside it, you can see Orkney, for example, and Gibraltar at the end here, but we're focusing on Newcastle. Looking at that, you'd expect a good, sizable margin to Remain in Newcastle. Now let's have a look at what happened in that Newcastle result. Here we go. Look at how close that is. See, it's nothing like what our index suggested there. It's barely 1% in it, 49.3 to 50.7. Now it could be, as John Curtis was saying, that when we analysed Newcastle, we missed something. That actually there was a strong latent Leave vote in Newcastle, which the data didn't suggest. But I'm pointing that out as quite a dramatic outlier based on our index. It looked like a Remainy kind of a place, and it's not. It's split almost 50-50. Now to Sunderland. Now Sunderland is in a different position on the board. It's actually a little way into Leave. Remember, there's 382 areas, so it's not a long way into Leave, but you'd expect a solid margin for Leave in Sunderland. Let's have a look at what we actually saw in Sunderland. and you see 61% to leave and 39% to remain. So 20-point or more gap. Now, looking at our board, you'd think that's a bit more for leave than we might have been expecting based on its position on the board. It's not that far off the centre, Sunderland. You might have expected it to be tighter. So these results have given us something to think about. We're looking at our index, we're wondering about the order, we're thinking, wait, is Leave's vote here a lot stronger than anyone was thinking? We'll find out as the results go in, but my goodness, Newcastle and Sunderland, David, don't anyone go to bed yet?
Thanks, Jeremy. And the markets, of course, have been very sensitive over the last few days. Kamal Ahmed, our economics editor, is here, and you have news that these two results have already affected the markets.
Certainly, David, there are some relatively sweaty traders out there tonight. A lot of strength in sterling early on tonight after the poll suggested that Remain had done very well. In the last few minutes, sterling has come down markedly off a high of $1.50, where it was its highest in the year. It's fallen by 3 or 4 cents since then in the last few minutes. I think traders are sitting there looking at the result in Newcastle, looking at the result in Sunderland and thinking, oh, hang on a minute, maybe those polls are a little bit too optimistic for Remain. We're in the wrong position now on sterling. Sterling would be expected to fall markedly if Britain did leave the European Union. And they're maybe on the wrong side of this trade at the moment. And there is some significant selling. What you're going to get, I think, David, over the next 2, 3, 4 hours is great volatility for sterling.
They're making a lot of money while they do all this.
Some people will be making a lot of money somewhere when you have this amount of volatility, either buying or selling.
And why, just to explain the point, why, if it is a vote for leave in the end, will sterling fall?
Because that will be, investors will think that it could be bad for the UK economy. Most economists say that if Britain did leave the European Union, then ultimately that could be, in the short term at least, bad for the UK economy. And also investor sentiment might turn against Britain. Britain runs a current account deficit. We need, as Mark Carney described, the Governor of the Bank of England, the kindness of strangers to support our debts. If those strangers start thinking, I'm not too sure about the UK economy at the moment, particularly if it left the European Union, then that would mean that sterling would start falling.
Well, you'll go on keeping an eye on it.
I will.
And keep us. We won't be gambling along with those market traders, but we'll be hearing how their gambles are going. Thank you very much indeed. We've got more news about the pound, Kamal.
Well, David, it's absolutely taken a hammering since that Sunderland result, which seemed to suggest that Leave might be doing a lot better tonight. It's down 6% in the last few minutes. I mean, that's a hammering that we will not have seen on the market since 2008 in the financial crisis. I mean, that is a very, very significant move. I blogged early on this evening, I said, if the markets have got this wrong with their positive sense that Remain was doing very well, that their internal polls were showing that, there would be an almighty correction in the value of sterling into the markets this morning and into Friday. And boy, are we seeing that. I mean, everyone's going to be watching the next few results to see if that Sunderland result was an outlier, but certainly a lot of traders who thought that Remain had a very, very good night are now selling out of sterling as quickly as they can, and the graphs are remarkable, just almost vertically down at the moment, sterling on the markets.
I'm joined by Diane James and Angela Eagle, and Vernon Bognall, Professor of Government at King's College in London, is with us too. So this is a very dramatic story that seems to be unfolding here. Angela, what do you make of it?
It's too early to tell. We've known all the way through that this was going to be a result on a knife edge. The polls have been all over the place, and after last year's general election, we don't even know whether to believe the polls. My experience out campaigning, in so much as you can get experience of 46 million votes when you're out campaigning, is that it has been pretty close. And I think we're seeing that with the initial results that we've seen, and it's just too early to tell.
Your Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell has said that the result from Sunderland was almost like, he put it, a by-election protest vote. In other words, the scale of the exit of the no vote there. And he said people are cheesed off. Migration's a big issue. Do you agree with him?
Yes, but I also think that what we've got is protest from communities who've been under the most pressure. And what the Leave campaign have done is give a scapegoat the European Union as the cause of that pressure, whereas actually the cause of a lot of that pressure is the cuts and the Conservative policies which have put the most pressure on the most vulnerable communities.
Let's have a look at this chart, which gives a rather dramatic picture of sterling. And I suspect it may have gone down a bit since then, but that is the fall in sterling as the result on the basis of the few results we've had, Sunderland, Newcastle. There's really those two. And what we've been hearing from North Warwickshire, I suspect, won't have done much good for sterling or from Nuneaton.
Just one thing that's just reached me, an expectation that in Lewisham, London Borough, Remain might have it by as much as 83% for Remain. That contrasted what we just heard from North Warwickshire of 80-20 to Leave. Now, it may be, and it's very early, but it may be we end up with a pattern, London versus the rest of the country.
Right, Emily, in which case London will declare you independent.
Maybe London goes off and becomes its own country.
Yes,
the rest of us go
but
off
people
in a
have
different
no,
direction.
people have quite seriously talked about London being such a powerhouse that it itself, I don't know where they get this from, but it itself feels that it shouldn't be bound by what the rest of the country thinks or wants.
Well, perhaps as Professor Bogdanov was suggesting, this, whatever the final result is, whether it is an outright result, the closeness, even the closeness of this would suggest that it's a big kick in the teeth to the establishment, which is, of course, business politics, nearly all based in London, and maybe that's part of the problem.
We've had a result from Foyle in Northern Ireland, and these results will all be added together before we get a formal Northern Irish result, but just have a look at it. Leave 8,900 and Remain 32,000. A strong nationalist area where we would have expected that.
We're here with Tim Montgomery and Alistair Campbell again. Tim, what are your team captains saying after results in Sunderland and Swindon, all looking very positive for Leave?
Certainly those results are looking positive for Leave, but perhaps the most interesting thing is the turnout. You're seeing, just as John Curtis was explaining, in London, in Northern Ireland, in Scotland, lower turnouts, whereas in the Leave areas, like some of the places we've seen in the North East and the home counties, the turnout is much greater. It seems to be the case that, as a lot of people expected, those that want to leave the European Union have always been more enthusiastic. And despite the weather, despite obstacles, they've turned out. So if this is true, and we should still be very cautious, that this could be a much better night for Leave than many of us were expecting a couple of hours ago.
So Kate Hoey said in the last few moments that Labour could end up losing thousands of voters over issues like immigration. I wonder if you think that the EU has become a proxy, if you like, for everything broken in a lot of people's lives, that divided country that Nick was talking
I
about.
certainly think, and this is the danger with referendums, I don't think this referendum has just been about Europe and the European Union. I think a lot of the people who've been turning against in this debate, particularly in a lot of what are seen as traditionally Labour areas, are people who just feel that the financial crisis happened and the people who caused it got away with it and they didn't. They feel that there's too much division, there's too much inequality, that all they've had from this government who talk about this great economic miracle is actually austerity, austerity, austerity. And they're basically saying two fingers to the lot of you.
But
and
Labour
if you
knew
don't
all
listen
that,
to that,
didn't they? I mean, Labour's known this for years now.
no,
You saw the vote disappearing in the North East to UKIP.
And I also think that the Labour Party has to understand that we can't just sort of keep on with banging on the same old messages that have come out through this campaign. I think this is about the Labour Party has to be really careful about this because, and I said to you earlier, two things I said to you earlier. One is this is not over, and secondly, I'm really worried about this just becoming about the Tory Party and the Tory Party leadership. There's a real danger for Labour here as well. And we have to face up to the fact that large parts of the country are actually turning away from both of the main parties. And I think this referendum has unleashed all sorts of stuff. It's why I always thought it was a bad idea to have it. And that sounds arrogant. Don't let the people decide.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
It more than sound arrogant.
No, I don't think it is arrogant. No, I
not
don't.
Consult the people on such a fundamental issue like this.
I've met
after
so
40
many people.
years.
I've met so many people around the place in the last few weeks saying, you've seen them in agony, having to make decisions that ultimately I think
democracy.
I want politicians to be elected and then lead. And we're in this position because of a lack of leadership and a lack of strategy.
Well, when you look at the leadership, every single leader except one has been on the Remain side.
Yeah, and I think Jeremy Corbyn gave a gift to the Leave campaign on Sunday when he said there was no upper limit on immigration from the European Union. And Alistair is right about the austerity factor, the fact there is a global revolt against the existing capitalist system. But I think Labour have underestimated how concerned the working class vote is about the lack of control over immigration.
More concerned than that, Tim, than, I mean, you and I have looked at that graph. I think the pound literally falling off a cliff. Not literally, but falling off a cliff. Factoring in a 40% leave tomorrow.
But people look at that and they think this is just markets making money. So, you know, we've given this kind of, the bookies and the markets have been telling us what's going to happen.
So the economic argument actually never got through.
No, the economic argument I think did get through. But for a lot of these people, they heard everybody talking about we're going to lose this great economic success that we've got, but they're not feeling that economic success now.
And also, you know, these are the same people who, remember the Queen's famous question to the Economist, why didn't you see the crash happen? You know, we've had the economists and the establishment wrong about Iraq war, wrong about regulation of Wall Street, wrong about immigration, wrong about...
right to say the British public don't need exports.
Well, there is a problem.
They need political leaders.
There is a problem we have at the moment, is that those powers that be, those established authorities, aren't trusted by at least half of the country.
Thank you both very much.
We're just talking about betting here. You're a famous betting man. Did you bet?
The market I trust most of all is not your parade of first-class sophologists like John Curtis. It's the exchange betting market, which is people have exchanged now £82 million in real money. And on that exchange market, it's come in. I mean, Leave has come in from 14 to 1 to about 7 to 4 in the course of the last 2 hours. But it's still staying as the favourite in that market. So David, if he absolutely believes it's going to be a Leave, he can now finance his leadership campaign for the Conservative Party.
And are you still putting money on?
Well, no, I've always I never bet on things that I set my heart on because it clouds your judgment. So I'm very for them. So I think horses are much more reliable.
But you can set
betting.
You can set your heart on a horse, surely.
Well,
let's get back to serious. Let's get back to serious.
I put 200 on this afternoon, but mostly I must admit because I was so irritated by my colleagues in the Leave campaign saying we're going to lose.
No, they had to get somebody to tell them how to write a betting slip.
Yes, I'm hopeless at it. Yeah.
David Davis, what process would you imagine following in the next few days from, if it happens, a Leave vote?
Well, I think the first thing is the Prime Minister has to decide who's going to take that control of that, what team he appoints. They're going to have to do quite a lot of consultation. It's going to be quite a long time before either we do what they trigger Article 50, as they call it, start the process, the process of negotiation. They've got to do a lot of preparation, and that'll start in the next few days.
Do you think he'd trigger it immediately, as he said? Because, I mean, there are all sorts of things you can do. You can talk till the cows come home and never trigger it. It's only an advisory.
Yeah. It would be unwise to trigger it straight away because you've got a lot of preparation to do. I mean, you've seen in this campaign, with the Leave campaign talking about the various things that might happen, that there is not a unanimity of view as to how to play this. There are a variety of ways to play it to Britain's advantage, but it will take some time.
And it's not up to the Leave campaign, is it?
No, it's not. It's up to the government. Yeah. And nobody should pretend it's simple. There's quite a lot to be done.
I think it's absolutely incredible. I mean, if the Prime Minister loses this, then I don't see how he can survive as Prime Minister. I mean, I to speak from personal experience. If you stake your career on a referendum and the people vote against you, then it's time to get. I mean, talk about lame ducks. I mean, this would be a duck with no legs and no stability whatsoever.
Alex, your referendum was existential to your party. I mean, it was what it's all about. This is not. This is a promise that actually David Cameron made to give the British people.
And he's conducted a campaign of bullying and intimidation, and half his cabinet have said you can't believe a word he says, and he's going to continue as Prime Minister. Yeah, right. That chance.
Right, now everybody says that one of the reasons that people are voting Leave is they've had enough of politicians. So for the moment, just for the moment, we've had enough of you.
And we're very nice to each other.
We've joined Dan Johnson. So let's go to Hartlepool now and join Luke Walton, who I think has maybe... You got the result, Luke? Are you the counting officer?
I had got some...
For Hartlepool?
I'm not the counting officer, but I had...
I've got some unconfirmed final results here, which is that Leave are on 32,000, Remain on 14,000, which means that Leave have taken more than 69% of the vote on my figures. As I say, those haven't been confirmed, but I understand from a number of sources here that that is the final picture here, which was more or less where Leave thought they were heading tonight, but I think was ahead of expectation, before today. So a very, very good result for Leave. I mean, the context here is that this is a Labour stronghold, but it's also somewhere where UKIP have a good organisation. They've been picking up councillors. They came a strong second in the general election. So.
The total number of ballot papers rejected was 63. And can I now take the opportunity of thanking everybody who assisted in this process?
So there's the percentage. Let's just see that 69-31 for Basildon. 69-31. We started the programme, the evening, looking with Jeremy Vine at a kind of way of seeing these results so we could judge whether it looked as though it was going to end up as Leave or Remain, anticipating where various places would lie along a line of probability. Just one way of assessing as we went along what's going on. Jeremy, can you take us through that again with the results we've now had in?
Yes.
And tell us how well it's doing.
Yeah, well, it's extremely interesting and dramatic, and there's something going on in the northeast, no question. Let me just explain here. We have the 382 counting areas. We've grayed them out where we don't have results yet, which obviously is nearly everywhere still. But on the basis of a 50-50 result, if it was absolutely even between the two sides, we'd expect the ones in the middle to be evenly split. So we're looking at expectations based on a tight result, and I can tell you what's happening against that expectation. So we're going to the northeast here. I'll just actually flash the councils in the northeast. There are a dozen of them. You'll see some of the bars flashing. The longer the bar, the more the voters in that area. Most of them on the Leave side. Now we had, didn't we, that extraordinary result from Newcastle, which is actually one of the few on the Remain side, quite dramatically for Remain, it seemed, until the result came in, when actually it was almost neck and neck, almost 50-50. We've now had another northeast result, Hartlepool. Let's find them on our index so you can see they're down the Leave end. So the expectation would be in Hartlepool that Leave would win. Let's see the actual percentage here and have a look at what Leave actually did. So in Hartlepool, it's really storming victory for Leave by 40%, and that goes way beyond what we would have expected in the event of a tight result between the two sides. You're looking more 10 or 20% Leave. So 70-30 is an extraordinary result for Leave, even though Hartlepool are on the Leave end of our spectrum. We'll have a look at another one now. South Tyneside we saw coming in. Let's find it now. It's not so much towards the Leave end. It's about midway between the halfway point on the index and the very end. There's South Tyneside. Let's have a look. So you wouldn't expect such a powerful vote for Leave. Let's see what actually happened here. And you can see it's 62% to 38%. And the margin there, again, is much bigger than we expected. And Sunderland, we started the night with, didn't we? Just one of the very first results. We pointed out that actually, based on our analysis of all the factors in Sunderland, they were Leave, but they're not deep into Leave territory, so we weren't expecting anything but quite a tight result from Sunderland, and actually we ended up getting this, 61 to 39, so it was the Leave side really showing a clean pair of heels to Remain in Sunderland. So we're gathering some intelligence here on these northeast councils, the 12 councils I mentioned in the northeast, and just making the point here that Leave is really storming it in the northeast of England, in the councils we've seen so far. And if I just bring back the index for you, here it is. You can see the results on the map that we got so far, but of course there is an awfully long way to go. And I suppose the point to underline here, David, is that if Leave are overperforming in the northeast, Remain are going to have to overperform somewhere else to catch up.
And we have, thanks Jeremy, a long way to go, because we gave the target of 16.8 million as the winning post, 16,800,000. Neither side is yet anywhere near a million. That gives you an idea of how much there is still to go. Leave on 723,000, Remain on 675,000. So there's a long, long way to go before we can safely call this. We've got more results in Merthyr Tydfil in Wales, 16,291 for Leave, 12,500 for Remain. That's 56%. For Leave there, 44%.
Agree on the answer, but if it does become the case that Scottish
They never agree on
votes,
anything much.
But if Scottish votes keep the UK in the European Union, where English votes have pointed out, what are the implications? I mean, David Davis, how would you and your backbench colleagues feel about that as a constitutional
we're a
settlement?
United Kingdom. I mean, virtually every pro-Leave MP is a strong unionist. So we accept the judgment of the whole kingdom.
Do you think all of your colleagues who fought so hard in this campaign would accept the result if Scottish votes keep the UK inside the European Union?
They have to. I mean, the simple truth is you have a referendum. You can hardly say this is a low turnout referendum. You can hardly say this is not a representative view of the people. If it had been 30%, it might be a different argument. You can't say that. And if you believe in the kingdom, you must believe in the result for the whole kingdom.
And Alex, just a Labour source is already blaming the SNP for a lacklustre campaign in the referendum. What do you say to that?
Well,
you say the percentages all look very healthy for Remain, but turnout does appear in Scotland to be lower than the rest of the UK.
Well, our campaign in Scotland has yielded a very positive result. In industrial areas where we represent, Remain is winning 60-40. In the industrial areas that Labour represent in England, they're getting absolutely hammered. So I think the Labour Party are casting about for responsibility. They should look to themselves. If they'd fought the campaign that we've fought in Scotland, perhaps they'd be in a happier position this evening.
Just before we go to look at Wales, do you think referendum's a good way of conducting political business?
For big constitutional issues only. Because we don't own the constitution. We don't own the future of the country. And so if you decide whether or not Scotland's independent, that's a decision for the whole people. If you want to decide whether we're in or outside the kingdom, that's a decision for the whole people.
Do you agree with that? Was it a wise decision to have a referendum?
Well, it's the only way to decide big constitutional issues. But with this proviso, if you're proposing a referendum, you should want to change something, establish an independent country. David Cameron fought a referendum basically not wanting to change anything. That was a fundamental mistake.
And then maybe to find he has to change things.
Well, it's very difficult to fight an inspiring campaign saying, follow me, I don't really want to change very much.
Right, thank you very much. And then we go to Exeter. We've got Exeter in the West Country, in Devon, and that's a Remain vote again, 55% for Remain, 45% for Leave. We'll just check on how Sterling's doing with Kamal. What's happened in the markets?
It's still going down pretty rapidly.
Sterling's still falling.
Sterling's still falling. It's down now at around $1.40. Got as high as $1.50 when there was a lot of confidence in the markets that Remain were going to win. There's another very important indicator, though, called the FTSE futures, which is a judgment on where the FTSE 100 will open when it opens in London later on this morning, and that is down 5%. Both those indicators, these percentages sound quite small, but both those indicators, those are huge moves in the markets. The type of moves, possibly for the pound, not seen before, certainly not since the 2008 financial crisis, and also for the FTSE 100. A 5% fall in a market would be a significant event and would really create a sense, I think, at that stage that the markets were in a major sell-off territory. And I think that the Bank of England now and others must be considering, if there is a Leave vote, and of course, as we said, we keep saying we're a long way from knowing that there may have to be some form of announcements made in the morning. Just to make one point clear, at the moment in sterling, the market is very thin on volumes. There aren't actually many traders trading the pound at the moment. So that means the volatility is very marked, because people moving can make very volatile spikes. So just to put that sort of slight warning and caveat into these numbers, but certainly the volatility is huge in market terms.
And the city is open all night tonight?
Trading. Forex is trading all night, trades 24 hours a day all around the world. On the Asian markets, the pound is down 5%. So it's down between 5 and 6%. And what's called these intraday moves within 1 day's trading, these are figures not seen, as I say, since the 2008 financial crisis, which I think just does show the level of market concern, I think more to do with uncertainty than to do with whether Britain is in or out of the European Union. As I said, I think at the opening of this programme, it's not political, this issue. It's not a judgment on whether Leave or Remain should or shouldn't win. It's about that uncertainty issue. It's about the notion of how will we trade with the European Union, which of course is our biggest market for export.
John McDonnell, you're the Shadow Chancellor. Of course, you're not allowed to talk about sterling, because Chancellors and Shadow Chancellors can't discuss sterling. He can, you can't. But what about the markets generally? And are you concerned about what you're hearing from your left?
I think some of the claims on both sides of the campaign were exaggerated about a recession, but we've always made it clear there would be a shock if the Remain camp didn't win and it was Leave. And that's exactly the sort of shock we're expecting. So I would expect the Bank of England to intervene in the morning. And I think we can't, Chancellors and Shadow Chancellors can't comment on sterling, but what we can do is have a mature approach to this and say whatever the outcome, we will negotiate the best deal we possibly can with regard to our trading partners in Europe, and in that way we might give some assurances to the market.
Glasgow has come in, the first large city in Scotland to come in, indeed the largest in numbers, 84,000 for Leave and 168,335 for Remain. So that's 67% share for Remain, 33% for Leave, boosting the number. In Scotland, and Falkirk also came in, where the count is being conducted, 34,271 for Leave, 44,987 Remain. That's 43% for Leave and 57% for Remain. And this is how Scotland overall is looking, with 17 of its counting areas declared, 38% Leave and 62% Remain. Expected to do better in both Lambeth and Wandsworth.
Those are both good results for Remain. In both cases, we're looking at figures for Remain that are about some 10 points above what we were expecting. So it's beginning to look as though London will indeed, even though we were expecting Remain to do well, may well do even better there. Contrarily, however, some of the first results from the northwest, places like St Helens, we are seeing the Remain side being well adrift. So it may be, we were long talking about in this referendum campaign about the potential difference between Scotland and England. We may also be talking about a major difference between London and the rest of England. And that at the end of the day, if indeed the United Kingdom does vote to leave, and we're not saying that's what's going to happen yet by any means, but if it does, it will be provincial England that will have determined the UK's fate.
You were talking earlier about turnout in London. Has turnout in London affected these raw figures? Has it had the effect you thought, or were the turnout figures accurate?
Well, I mean, what does seem to be true is that the increase in turnout in London above what we got in last year's general election seems to be somewhat less than it is in most other parts of the UK. It's rising by about 4 points or so in London. It's 6 points across the country as a whole. We should say, by the way, we've not really said this so far. I mean, at the beginning of the night, we were talking about very high turnouts. Well, that's a bit of an exaggeration. But it does look as though we've got something like a 72% turnout for this referendum, which will be the first time since 1997 in a UK-wide vote that we've got more of a 70% turnout. So the truth is, whoever does win this referendum, we still don't know who it's going to be, and those London results have added to the uncertainty. It will be very difficult to argue that they don't have a mandate and the country has not made a clear decision. Voters have been engaged by this referendum in a way that, frankly, recent general elections have rather failed to interest them.
And of course the percentage is not a reflection of the actual numbers, because there have been a lot of people who put their names on the register to vote who weren't there before.
Indeed, so the fact that
the
fact that we've got 72% of the vote, even though about 1.7 million added their names to the register since last December, is an indication of, as it were, an even greater democratic success than it otherwise would be.
Here we are at Broadcasting House, BH as it's lovingly called, saying it's too early to call, but have a look at the figures, projecting there on the front. The yellow for Remain at 50.7 and Leave at 49.3.
In relation to what the offer is to working class people, it's not something new in this campaign. I'm not the only one. but it's a small number who've been saying it at the national level in Labour. I've said it for the last 10 years repeatedly.
And
what we're offering working class people is 0-hour contracts. What the country's offering, 0-hour contracts, agency work, insecurity, and people are sick to death of it. They've had enough. And that's why, in my area and elsewhere, Labour voters have voted in huge numbers to leave the European Union.
John McDonnell, do you think he's right in this critique of Labour?
I think John's right on a number of the policy issues, but on 0-hours contracts, we've already said we're going to scrap them altogether. In terms of insecurity at work, we've said we'll tackle the issue of the undermining of trade union rights in this country, and that means opposing the government's Trade Union Act. In addition to that, in terms of security, we want to have the workforce more involved in the planning of their company, represented on their company boards. So all of those issues that John has raised, we've actually got policies to deal with them. The issue for us now is how do we get those policies across? What's interesting is if you look at the shape of the vote tonight, is those areas that are not gaining in any way from the supposed recovery in the economy and have suffered economically over the last decade that are voting for leave. And I think that is, yes, it's a reflection of what they think about the European Union not assisting them, but I also think it's a reflection of a condemnation of the government's policies over the last 7 years when it comes to austerity. There's real grievances out there which we think we've got the policies to address, and we need to get those across.
Theresa Villas, as a Brexiter, do you think he's right, that that's what you're winning, if you are winning, because of the failings of the Conservative government?
No, I think that the people who voted leave did so with a real understanding of the issues, that at the moment, as a member of the European Union, we do not govern our own affairs. It doesn't matter who you vote for at a devolved or a general election. There are many things that you cannot change, including free movement and immigration rules, and that's not healthy for our democracy.
So it's a constitutional matter for people, not what John is saying, and John is saying that people feel that they've been left behind and that they've had they've static wages for a long time, uncertain, move on. To just see how things stand and how far we've got to go. Here is the House of Commons. As dawn comes up, not quite, 3:25. And this is the vote. The centre there is the winning post, the red dotted line. And it's 6 million leave at the moment and 5.8 million remain. So leave has the edge, and the grey bit is, of course, the bit that has got to be filled in. Let's
Well, early results have upset the world's financial markets. The pound initially soared as polls closed, but then it suffered its third largest fall on record, plummeting from about $1.50 to almost $1.40 as results began to show stronger than expected support for leaving the EU. More recently, the pound has recovered, but the markets are still volatile.
I think we're expecting Nigel Farage. David.
Thank you very much. So I think we're joined by Nigel Farage. I hope we are. He's speaking.
Ladies and gentlemen,
let's hear him.
Dare to dream that the dawn is breaking on an independent, united kingdom. If the predictions now are right, this will be a victory for real people, a victory for ordinary people, a victory for decent people. We have fought against the multinationals, we fought against the big merchant banks, we fought against big politics, we fought against lies, corruption and deceit, and today honesty, decency and belief in nation, I think now is going to win. And we will have done it. We will have done it without having to fight, without a single bullet being fired. We'd have done it by damned hard work on the ground, by people like my friend Mr. Banks here. And by people in the Labour Party and the Conservative Party and UKIP and of no party who've taken part in this campaign. And we'll have done it not just for ourselves, we'll have done it for the whole of Europe. I hope this victory brings down this failed project and leads us to a Europe of sovereign nation states trading together, being friends together, cooperating together, and let's get rid of the flag, the anthem, Brussels, and all that has gone wrong. Let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day.
Interesting there, Nigel Farage, in effect, claiming victory for the campaign, even though he wasn't part of the official campaign. We haven't heard from the leaders of that campaign, from Michael Gove, or we haven't heard from Mr. Grayling. It's Nigel Farage actually just sort of taking command of the situation and saying that victory is theirs and all the rest of it. So, we join Justine Greening. What do you make? Did you hear Mr. Farage there, Justine Greening?
I did, yes.
Relishing his moment of glory. Why are things not going so well for your party and for the Remain campaign? I mean, we're making no assumptions about who's won.
Yeah, and obviously this is still way too close to call. It's still comparatively early in the evening in terms of the results coming through. So I think Nigel Farage has really jumped the gun in what he's just said. But in the end, what we do know is this has been a very close-fought campaign and referendum, and it'll have a very close result. And so what we'll need to do is knit our country back together and recognise that whoever wins tonight, whichever side, probably 1 in 2 people watching this programme right now will have voted for the side that didn't come out on top. And it's really important that whatever path our country takes, first of all, that we respect the result of this referendum. This is respect for democracy as well. And I'm certainly committed to making whatever path we take work, but it has to work for the whole of our country. And I think it's way too early in the night to be calling it one way or another. What we do know is that it's incredibly tight, it's incredibly close. A lot of this is going to go down on turnout. And clearly, as we've just heard from the 2 fantastic young people who were interviewed earlier on, the engagement of young people in this referendum has been absolutely critical. And we shouldn't forget that in the end, it's their future that we're very much deciding.
I have to say, yes, I think your optimism may be ill-founded, but anyway, we shall see in an hour or so's time. But if your optimism is ill-founded, and if it's a vote Leave that wins, what should happen?
Well, again, I think it's way too early to call this referendum result. What I do know is that whatever the result, we have to respect it.
Okay, fine, you said that.
And we'll have to make the best of it for our country.
Okay, let me try you on another one. Why has it got so close?
We have the referendum because this is a heated debate that many people around our country have had for many, many years. There would have been no point having a referendum on a topic where people largely agreed. Everyone knows that this has been a debate that has very much divided public opinion. And it was time to take this debate out of Westminster, away from MPs, and actually give it to people in Britain to decide. And we've had a historic referendum. We will have a historic result that will take our country in one path or another. But I think it was right to give the British people their say.
And did you fight the campaign in the right way, or was it too negative on your part, on the Conservative part, on David Cameron's part? A negative campaign. Things like George Osborne's budget threatening to put our income tax by 2 pence in the pound, to remove pensioners a triple lock on their pensions, all those things. Do you think people just turned away from it because it was trying by fear to force them to vote the way that David Cameron and you wanted them to vote?
I think we did run a positive campaign.
And David Cameron can remain Prime Minister and carry through the consequences of this vote and go back to Europe and negotiate on behalf of a...
I really do. I'm not just saying that because I want...
It's a humiliation for him.
Look, I think that he's someone who takes very seriously his duty as Prime Minister to be a steward of the nation's affairs. This is going to be a really big moment where I think this is exactly the kind of thing where he will want to make sure that the country is in safe hands. And I think that he himself, although he's lost this argument, it looks like, although again it's a little early to be certain of that. He was saying not that long ago that we can prosper and flourish outside the EU. I think that he is the best person to lead us in what will be a very, very
but he won't
process.
know which direction to go in, will he? Because his whole argument has been about the necessity of staying in the EU. You can't then suddenly start arguing about the necessity of leaving the EU.
Well, it's
I mean, you're right.
But that
it's a
argument
very
is over, frankly, because we had the vote today. So it's no longer about whether, it will be about how. And I think that he will be able to, he's the one in the best position to do that well.
But by the very least, Steve Hilton, surely his time in office, the timetable will be shortened and curtailed. Certainly, ministers, MPs are split on whether or not he'd have to go immediately. But what everybody agrees on privately is that his timetable is shortened now.
I don't really understand why that needs to be the case. He was elected last year for a full term, and that, knowing that there'd be this referendum, there are no conditions attached to that. He should serve the full term.
We have to pause because it's time for an update of the news. So let's join Rita Chakrabarti.
Thank you, David. Well, with more than half the votes counted in the UK's referendum on the EU, it's looking increasingly possible that the Leave camp has built up a clear lead. The overall result is still too close to call, but Leave has better than expected results in vast areas of the country. Remain has had good results in London, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Well, early results have upset the world's financial markets, with the pound falling again in the past hour to $1.34, its lowest point since 1985. When the polls closed, it soared to $1.50, but as they showed stronger than expected support for leaving the EU, it began to plummet. Markets in Asia are down nearly 3%.
Well, at 20 minutes to 5, we can now say the decision taken in 1975 by this country to join the common market has been reversed by this referendum to leave the EU. We are absolutely clear now that there is no way that the Remain side can win. It looks as though the gap's going to be something like 52 to 48, so a 4-point lead for leaving the EU. And that's the result of this referendum, which has been preceded by weeks and months of argument and dispute and all the rest of it. The British people have spoken, and the answer is, we're out. Laura.
Well, so rare that a country, as individuals, we get the chance to take a decision as big as this. This was the most profound question we had been asked for decades as a nation of voters. And we have answered it with a vote against the status quo, against political expectation, against the traditional political rules that in Britain voters tend to go with what they're told is their economic self-interest. Instead, people have decided to defy those conventions, defy the expectations of Westminster, defy all the advice from experts, big business, economists and the like, and vote to leave the European Union. And this is a vote that has huge consequences, not just for our country, but also implications for a whole continent. And it unleashes a period of huge uncertainty, maybe huge opportunity, but also maybe huge risks too.
And the immediate results, Kamal Ahmed has been following. What are the financial markets saying?
Well, David, I think this has come as a shock to the financial markets. We were seeing the pound at 10 o'clock last night at record levels for 2016. It has now hit lows not seen since 1985. That is how much the markets are concerned about this decision for Britain to leave the European Union.
Pound is what now to the dollar?
It's down at 134, 135.
How did it begin the evening?
And it started at $1.50, so it's lost 15 cents today. It's fallen over 10%.
What
in
about
currency
stock
terms,
market
David,
figures? Is there anything there?
Well, in currency terms, David, that is astonishing. That type of volatility is higher than in the financial crisis of 2008, when Britain crashed out of the European exchange rate mechanism in 1992. On the stock markets, the Nikkei in Japan, obviously the Asian markets are open at the moment. The Nikkei in Japan is down 3%. This is really a global issue. It just adds to this notion of global uncertainty around. And also that the euro has weakened significantly against the dollar. So clearly, not only is this a UK issue, but this is a euro area issue as well. Because what will the ramifications be when Britain leaves? What will that mean for the other European Union economies, the possibilities of other referendums? But just as Laura says, Britain has made a decision that has sort of reversed that old famous phrase by the Clinton aide, it's the economy stupid when it comes to issues of elections. People have said they don't care what they've been told about the economy, what the reaction may or may not be.
You may just have a different view on the economy from the experts.
Or they may have a different view. And I think
Steve Hilton, they may believe it's going to be better.
Well, I think as well, David, I think a big point which I think has been underestimated by what might be described as the establishment. In 2008, nobody predicted, or very few people predicted, that people might not be able to go to their ATM and get out their own cash out of a bank. I think that really produced a complete disconnect between the public and the people so-called in charge. I think that is still running now, because if economists tell you A, B and C is going to happen, but in 2008 they couldn't guarantee you could get money out of your bank, well, why listen to them?
Do you think there'll be emergency measures taken by the Chancellor or by the Bank of England this morning to stop
a
run on sterling, for instance? Are there measures they should or could take?
I am sure that the Bank of England will be considering now what statements they need to make to the markets before the markets open in London in the next 3 hours. And
will the markets open in London, or can the stock market be closed?
They will do. They will do. I mean, we will see the FTSE's futures, which is an index which predicts which way the FTSE is going to go when it opens, is down 8% at the moment. It would be, although we are in uncharted territory, it would be remarkable if the London market did not open. You can, of course, suspend trading if the volatility is so high and the initial fall is so deep. That decision can be taken, and it will be for the Treasury and the Bank of England to come together to talk about that. I'm sure, though, that Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England, and I'm told that he is planning, this is being planned at the moment, will come out with some form of public statement. They hope to do it after the Prime Minister has spoken, to give some form of reassurance about liquidity, about financial support for banks in particular. Banking stocks are likely to be heavily hit when the markets open in London. HSBC, which is one of our biggest banks, is also listed on the Asian markets, and its share price is already falling. Why does this really matter to people? It's quite interesting. I'm getting quite a lot of tweets from businesses saying, I buy in dollars from, from suppliers from abroad, and therefore my costs are going to go up hugely because of this. So on one side, it will be bad for some businesses, but of course, if sterling falls markedly, that is very good for British exports. We've always struggled in the export market. So although economically there are pluses and minuses to what is happening, in terms of the currency, they clearly were far too complacent at 10 o'clock last night about which way this vote was going to go. And they are now desperately trying to change their position on sterling, because sterling, I'm sure, is going to have a pretty torrid time in the markets.
And with some holidays coming along, it's not much fun for people planning to go abroad on holiday. They're going to find their pound doesn't go very far.
Those people who were queuing outside currency exchanges yesterday to buy their euros were pretty smart.
Mr. Vaz, what do you think is going to happen now?
Well, David, good morning. This is a crushing decision. It's a terrible day for Britain and a terrible day for Europe, with immense consequences. 41 years when British ministers went over and embedded themselves in trying to make sure that Europe was open, protecting the single market. This is all gone in this day, and it's just so terrible. I think what needs to happen now, of course, is there has to be an emergency summit. I would be surprised if next week the EU leaders did not meet together, because we are one of the biggest countries in the EU. We are crucial to the success of the EU, and therefore the leaders have got to get together, and David Cameron has got to be there, and there has got to be a workable plan to ensure that we implement the wishes of the British people, even though we think it's the wrong decision, we have to respect that decision. It will have huge implications for our security, in particular the migration crisis, dealing with illegal migration. We need the support of our EU partners to deal with the situation in Calais. It will have huge implications for our counter-terrorism strategy, the issues surrounding the European arrest warrant. All these matters are now put at risk by the decision that has been taken. Frankly, David, in 1,000 years I would never have believed that the British people would have voted in this way, and they have done so, and I think that they voted emotionally rather than looking at the facts, and it'll be catastrophic for our country, for the rest of Europe and indeed the world.
Why do you think they voted this way?
Well, I think you've correctly identified the issues of immigration are extremely important. If you look at the campaign, I think that there needed to be a much stronger campaign to stay in. The Leave campaigners were prepared to indulge in hand-to-hand combat in local constituencies. I'm very pleased to say that the Leicester result has come in and Leicester has voted to remain, but with a very, very small majority, only 2,500. This is a big shock to all of us in Leicester. If a city like Leicester just manages to vote Remain, then there is a real problem in the way in which we put across the arguments and explained what we plan to do in reforming the European Union. The country obviously accepts that the European Union, in the Prime Minister's words, was not perfect, and they've decided it isn't perfect and they want to come out. So we have to accept that. But I think that the way we put these arguments across was perhaps not as effective as the way the Leave campaign was prepared to go into local constituencies, appeal to the emotions of local people and act in that way. And that is what they did. They rejected the advice of all the experts. They rejected the arguments that had been put forward by almost everyone in Parliament. I mean, those who are going to vote against this were in the minority, and the country has accepted it. They've rejected everything that's been put before this.
It's democracy. It's democracy, isn't it? It's democracy.
It is. Absolutely, it is democracy, and that's why I'm saying that we have to respect this decision, but we have to act in the best interests of our country. And I think that David Cameron really fought a very strong campaign. He went around the country and he put the arguments to the British people, but they have rejected those arguments. And therefore, what we now need to do is to work with colleagues to make sure that we get the best deal in respect of our exit.
Keith Vaz, thank you very much.
I never thought I would ever say.
Thank you for joining us. Fiona Hislop joins us. Kamal, just pick us up on the latest moves on markets and money and all the rest.
Yeah, so the Nikkei, that's the Japanese stock market, has fallen sharply. It's down about 8%. We've seen the pound as being down now, flirting with levels not seen since 1985. As I said before, David, what's called FTSE Futures, so that's an index that predicts where the FTSE 100 in London will go once it opens in 3 hours' time. That's down 7%. I mean, just touching on this point, as Laura was saying, this is a global issue. The euro itself has fallen towards parity with the dollar, so the euro currency is also being sold. There's a real flight to safety, I think it's called. So people are moving towards the dollar. Gold has gone up by 7%. Today. I just think that the uncertainty that this creates will create this very volatile day on the markets and will mean that for the next 24 hours certainly, and certainly for the next few days, as the markets try and digest something that frankly they didn't believe was going to happen, will be astonishingly volatile. And I'm sure that, well, of course, George Osborne, whilst he remains as Chancellor, Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England, will be in discussion about how they can provide at least a degree of reassurance that volatility doesn't spiral into anything worse within the UK economy.
Okay. Steve Hilton, you heard Keith Vaz from the Home Affairs Committee really moved, speaking as though the earth has dropped beneath his feet, that the whole world has changed in a trice and worried about the effects of it. Do you think it's as seismic an event as that?
I do.
Yes.
I share the emotion in a sense, but in the other direction. I think it's an absolutely stunning result, but one that has huge opportunity for our country and indeed the world. But I think we've got to make the most of it now. That's the most important thing. And I agree with absolutely everything Chuck said earlier about really using this as a wake-up call to address some of those problems that have been festering for so long and I think have led to this result. And it's not just the last few years. I think it goes back decades, actually. This sense of people losing control about power going into fewer and fewer hands, not just in relation to government and politics, but in the economy too, with big businesses operating around the world and being callous about the impact of their decisions on real people's lives. I think that's what this vote is all about. It's a rejection of all of that, and I think we've got to really take it seriously.
But Steve, I think the interesting thing about this take control argument that has been made by many who've advocated us leaving the European Union is the idea is to take back control to the UK state. But most of the people who've been making the argument do not believe in active government, in the economy, in terms of interventions to make and try and shape the global economy so it better delivers for people. And that's why I think there's a slight, I mean, there'll be lots of interpretation on this. You see it as a constitutional power thing. I think there's definitely that. But I think ultimately, why is it that immigration has prevailed and been such a potent issue? Is because you've got an economy that people don't think is working for them. And actually, this thing comes down to how do we make globalisation work for middle and lower income earners who frankly think that for a kind of internationally mobile 1%, it works, but for them it doesn't. And I don't think necessarily the small state solution that many of the people in Vote Leave believe when it comes to domestic politics is...
Let's now look at how things stand and how this story is unfolded and where it is that the Leave campaign has won and where it is that the Remain campaign has won in this very close vote, which leaves 4 points at the moment between the two sides. Jeremy.
Yes, let me actually take you inside the Queen Elizabeth Tower here. And what we thought we would do is a comparison with the first referendum in 1975, so we can see how the nation is divided. So let's just bring on a clock face here. And this is, I guess, as close as we get to a swingometer in a referendum night. This is England in 75. And you can see that the blue there is Leave, and England was 31.5% Leave in 1975. Now this is so dramatic. Watch this as we feed in the results from the last 24 hours. Look at that. Over the 50%, nearly 55%. England actually more Eurosceptic on average than the country as a whole. So a massive change in England over those 4 decades. And actually in Wales too. Have a look. We'll turn the tower, change the clock, go back to 75, and 35% in Wales saying no to the EU. On the losing side, the majority saying Remain. Now look at the figure for 2016. Here it comes, and again it's over 50%. So Wales much more Eurosceptic than it was in 1975. So England and Wales very similar. But now the story changes. If you look at Northern Ireland in 1975, you see quite a high level of Eurosceptic voting in that referendum. Very conservative part of the country back then, nearly 50% against. They've actually become more inclined towards the EU in the last 4 decades. And the Leave voters dropped there to below 45%, so Remain then on the increase in Northern Ireland, we learn in the last 24 hours. And Scotland also, the same sentiment. So in 75, this was the Leave vote, 41%. In 2016, it drops back. And you have this extraordinary situation where, as one Scottish politician was saying earlier, you're told to stay in the UK to remain in the EU. You stay in the UK, it has the reverse effect, with parts of England effectively pulling Scotland out of the EU. So it's very dramatic, isn't it? Northern Ireland and Scotland becoming more enthusiastic about the European Union. Wales and England, over the last 40 years, dramatically more sceptical.
Thanks very much. We've got a comment from Paddy Ashdown, Lord Ashdown, who was with us earlier. It just says, Lord, God help our country, his tweet. 37,000, bottom right-hand corner of the screen there, needed for victory for the Leave campaign. And we'll just perhaps wait until we cover that. I think we've just reached that point. There we are. That is now statistically, mathematically there, that the Leave campaign have won, and we're expecting at the end of the count 52% for Leave, 48% for Remain. Quite an extraordinary moment. Not in terms of the way people voted, because it was all the way through people have said it was a very close run thing, but in terms of a turnaround for British foreign policy, British policy towards the EU, British internal policy, British policy on immigration, you name it, everything now is up for change because of this decision. And however you look at it, it's an earthquake that has happened. And what happens after earthquakes, well, we wait to see. From your point of view, you're quite confident.
Yes. Fantastic news. Absolutely brilliant for the United Kingdom. Absolutely brilliant. It's superb.
Emily?
In Northern Ireland, they voted 56% to remain, and now they're going to have a border between Northern Ireland and the south. The security implications of that have yet to be worked through. The implications for that, for the peace process, have yet to be worked through.
Jeremy, should we just have a look at the story which has now unfolded for people who just joined us to see what it is that happened this evening and last night as the results were counted?
It started 8 hours ago, didn't it, David? It seems like a lifetime ago now, and doubtless the man behind that door of number 10 has some serious questions to answer about what he does next, as Dr. Fox was just saying there. Let's just go back, shall we, to the start of the night, and a very, very early result, which rang all kinds of warning bells for the Remain side, was Newcastle. Now, this was supposed to, you'll see it come on the our Downing Street there, coloured up in yellow, because it did vote to Remain, but only just, and it was supposed to go quite substantially for Remain. So immediately you were seeing there the Leave vote much stronger than we thought, and that was around midnight. Followed then by Swansea, which was interesting, because we had that down on our index as one likely to Remain, and Swansea voted to Leave. So the results started to really worry the Remain side from an early stage. It looked for a while like London might come to the rescue of Remain. Lambeth reporting an extraordinary majority, something like 80% to Remain, and other parts of London going strongly enough for the yellow side, but not strong enough to overtake the Leaves. Sheffield, Durham, Birmingham we had next. Now, 3:25 in the morning, Sheffield comes in. Here we are. We bring it on to our Downing Street here. And this was a sign of things to come, that cities outside London, which we thought might have edged to Remain, actually went Leave. Durham was a classic 50-50. We thought Durham might well go 50-50 if it was a close result. Durham went Leave, which was a sign that the country was going Leave. And then Birmingham with 700,000 voters. In the end, they basically all cancelled each other out. We thought we might get a Remain from Birmingham. We got a blue for Leave from there as well. And finally, Northumberland took us over the line. Leave coming first. No way back for Remain. In the end, their powerful areas, London, Scotland in particular, didn't bring forward enough votes to conquer Leave, who had extraordinary turnout and resilience in places all around the country, particularly England and Wales as well. And as I say, it leaves some real questions for the man who called the referendum and took that huge gamble. David.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Well, if you've just joined us, the answer is, of the referendum result, is that 52% of the country voted to Leave, 48% voted to stay. So the decision was absolutely clearly that the people of this country, by a majority of 4% in effect, want to leave the EU. And that has all sorts of ramifications, which we'll go into a bit later on. But